Mirasee.
Bad conversations that are difficult can have like 37 items. Well, 27 years ago when you said blah, blah, blah. Is that what we're talking about? And then there's confusion and a proliferation of just overwhelm for most people. And then we descend into our worst selves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Irena O'Brien, and you're listening to Neuroscience of Coaching. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist with almost 30 years of study and practice in psychology and neuroscience. And as the founder of the Neuroscience School, I teach coaches and other wellness professionals real-world, evidence-based strategies to use in their own practices. In each episode, I invite a seasoned coach to discuss a topic that affects our field, and together, we provide you with science-based tools to help your clients reach their goals by working with their brains to create results that last. Have you ever had a conversation that went completely sideways, where you walked away wondering, how did they hear that from what I said? You probably have, and you're not alone. And it turns out there's a scientific reason behind it. Today, we're diving into the neuroscience of communication, and here's the big idea. We don't just hear what someone says, we hear what we expect to hear. Our brains are wired to predict, not just perceive. Before a word even finishes leaving someone's mouth, your brain is already filling in the blanks with its own best guess. This isn't a flaw. It's actually a survival mechanism. Our brains are constantly scanning for patterns, comparing what's happening now to what's happened before, and trying to make sense of the world as fast as possible. That's great when you're driving a car or reacting to danger, but it can create real problems when you're trying to truly understand another person. New research shows that even our senses are shaped more by our internal expectations than what we actually experience. Studies have found that when participants watched or heard familiar things, their brains down-regulated sensory processing and instead relied more on areas involved in planning and prediction. The brain assumes it knows what's coming next. And this helps explain why two people can sit in the exact same meeting and walk away with totally different takeaways, or why a coaching client might hear a criticism when you're actually offering support. In this episode, we'll explore how predictive processing shapes our perceptions, how it affects our conversations, and most importantly, what we can do to become more aware of our own mental filters so we can be better listeners, better communicators, and better coaches. And to help us dive into this topic, I have a fascinating guest expert. Julia Menard is a conflict leadership specialist with more than 30 years of experience in mediation, coaching, and training. She began her career mediating neighborhood and court disputes, and for the past 2 decades has focused on helping leaders navigate workplace conflict with clarity and compassion. Julia is a co-author of the book, Hold On to Yourself, How to Stay Cool in Hot Conversations, a TEDx speaker and co-founder of the Un-Conflicates Leadership Institute, which equips leaders with the mindset and tools of a mediator. She also teaches at the Center for Conflict Resolution. So Julia, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for wanting to speak about this, Irena. I'm very excited and honored also to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited about this too, about having you on. So you've spent decades helping people navigate difficult conversations. So how has your understanding of the brain's predictive nature changed the way you approach conflict?
Well, I think for me, because I've been in the game a long time and neuroscience wasn't really even something most people spoke about 30 years ago. I think a lot of my learning has been experiential, and then as the neuroscience would reveal itself, it would confirm certain things that I had learned on my own.
Okay. Oh, thank you. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, we often hear what we expect to hear, not necessarily what was said. So how do you help leaders or clients become aware of these unconscious filters in high-stakes conversations?
I think for me, it starts with safety. because I'm trying to think of the connection that I'm having with a client or I'm having with somebody in conflict. And if I don't feel a sense of safety, now I know from the brain science that the safety piece is important so that I can relax, so I can feel connected. But I developed this over time. Unless I have that first piece, which is the connection, then I can't influence them in any way. So it starts there. And I'm going to tell a very quick little story related to you and I. So
I think I know which story that is.
do you want to tell it?
No, you can go ahead and tell it.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so we first met because we wanted to prepare for this podcast, and you were very kind and very professional and asking me questions about helping me to prepare. And I really wanted to stop and just get to know you a little bit as a person and to have some kind of personal connection or heart connection. And I think we found one pretty quickly.
We did.
Hmm. And I don't know about you, but I find that the resonance between us is quite different because we've found the commonality. And I wondered about your experience.
I have found it different too. It's actually gotten me to thinking that I should start all my conversations like that, like when we're preparing for podcasts, because it really made a difference. And so you and I already have a relationship, even though we were on the phone for like, what, 15, 20 minutes, and that was it. And it just makes the podcast, the conversation during the podcast, so much more relaxed. And I think in the end, it's going to be richer.
I agree.
So as I mentioned in my introduction, we often hear what we expect to hear, right? Not necessarily what was said. So how do you help leaders or clients become aware of these unconscious filters in high-stakes conversations?
Yeah, so I think the first part, which we've just had an exchange about, is this notion of safety. So once I feel a sense of connection with somebody, then I think questions. I mean, this is the mainstay of any coach's repertoire or any coach's toolkit, is to ask certain questions. And over the years, I've developed a process that I've made it into an 8-step difficult conversations model. But essentially, those steps have the questions embedded in them in terms of helping people think things through. So one of the first steps, there's a collaborative mindset step, but one of the first steps is really trying to get a sense of the person's own motivation and helping them connect with their own motivation to have the difficult conversation. Because difficult conversations are difficult for a reason. They take energy, there's a lot of risk to them. So the first tool is called Find Your Motivation, and I lead clients through questions around, okay, so what are some of the risks of bringing this conversation up? And we're very good at risks. And I'm sure you've talked about negativity bias.
Yes.
So yes, clients really, and any human being wants to tell us all the reasons why we should not have that conversation with them because fill in the blank. We've had 20 of these conversations before and they haven't worked, or this person is and pull out a label, or they're unreasonable, etc. So, okay, let them have a couple of those. Okay, you've got an idea of that. Now let's talk about some of the benefits. And there's a blank stare often in terms of some of the benefits. But eventually, as we look at exploring some of the risks for the other party as well, there's 4 quadrants: risks for them, benefits for them, potential risks for the other party, potential benefits for the other party. Slowly, it's kind of like when we've got certain neural nets in our brain, they're pretty tightly woven, and we've got to carefully kind of walk around them with the questioning and a lot of listening. So yes, I hear that that person has not wanted to speak with you before, and being really careful about how I listen back in that dance of the first step of helping them find their motivation, because I'm not listening back repeating the negative comments. And I think that that's a common trap a lot of coaches and people I've worked with get into. We'll think we're listening by repeating back, oh yes, they're a horrible person or whatever, but we want to go deeper and get into what are the what are the values we're hearing? So the other person might be afraid to speak with you, you're telling me. Well, no, I didn't say afraid. Okay, so let's, so all of a sudden you've planted a seed though, and not to be different than what they're saying, but trying to hear, the deeper levels as you do the listening. So it's a bit complex in terms of leading them through that first risk assessment, but essentially you're helping them figure out why I should even bother in the first place, and helping them actually craft what we call at the On-Conflict Leadership Institute a North Star statement. Okay. And it's often things like, I want to have integrity. I want to stand up for my own values. I want to make a difference. And so it's quite surprising to go from, I'm not even going to speak with that person, to, okay, I could see that there could be some rationale for being able to have this conversation.
So in effect, you help move them into a state where they want to have the conversation.
Yeah, and I think after the first step, they may not still want to have it, but they could see a glimpse of it,
Right, less against it.
Less against it. Well said.
Yeah.
Yes.
So would you mind sharing the other steps that you go through? Yeah.
Yes. So I'll describe them in 3 pillars. So you've got the first pillar has to do with our internal preparation. So that first one we've already gone into in a little bit of detail. Just find your motivation. And you don't have to do all of them, because sometimes people are clear that, yes, I've got to have this conversation. Fine. You don't need to think that through. The second one is a quick check-in about power. And power is a complex topic. And Raven and French have done some good research in terms of sources of power. So I reference that. And I won't go into the detail of that, but it's essentially checking in where you feel like you're sourcing your power, what your assessment is of the power at play in this situation. And then the third one has to do with, I call it setting it up well, but it's a lot of your territory, Irena, because it's about, how am I going to manage my emotions? How am I going to manage myself going into this conversation? My heart is probably going to be beating a mile a minute. I might say some things that I regret. They're often flying off the handle. So just giving oneself structurally, predictably, some space to think about that. And once again, all 3 of these first steps in the preparation pillar aren't necessarily steps that you have to do, and they can be helpful to think through.
Yep.
So pillar 2 is a fairly classic process. And when I name it, I hope people can start to see that it's in every single conversation. So there's an opening. Ta-da! And John and Julie Gottman, who they're probably in their 70s now. They've been marriage researchers for 40 or 50 years. So they're not in the neuroscience field, but they're in the marriage therapy field. But they've tracked thousands of conversations to see how couples resolve their ruptures, essentially. They bring them into an Airbnb for the weekend, and they hook them up and they watch them, and then they analyze their conversation. So it hasn't been through the brain, but it has been based on a lot of qualitative and quantitative data. So one thing they discovered was how the couple started the difficult conversation was predictive of how the conversation would end. It was predictive to something like 94%. It was in the 90s. And when I came across that research, I had a big light bulb moment, because I went, oh, that applies to what we do. And that makes sense to some of the things that I've done. For years, I would have my clients start a conversation by sharing with each other their best intention for having the conversation. So there was an intentionality about how the conversation started. And of course, this links to neuroscience, because the person is not saying, I want to gouge your eyes out. They're saying, this is the best that I have to offer. This is the best of me. And in mediations where people have been in protracted conflict, I do pre-mediation. So it's like coaching. I would meet with them before to prepare them for the conversation. And in those preparatory conversations, I would say, the very first thing I'm going to ask you is what your best intention is. And so I help them with that and help them uncover it and be prepared for it. So that's the opening. I can just say the word opening, but I think you can see there's complexity and intentionality about how you're going to open this difficult conversation. Because a lot of people go, I got to have a conversation. I got to talk with you. It's just like boom, 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 boom. No, that isn't working, So step 2 of the middle pillar, like you have the conversation opens, and then what are you going to talk about? Bad meetings never even have an agenda. Bad conversations that are difficult can have like 37 items. Well, 27 years ago when you said blah, blah, blah. Oh, is that what we're talking about? And then there's confusion and a proliferation of just overwhelm for most people. And then we descend into our worst selves. We get into the brain states that I'm very used to seeing, where people are crying or judging each other or staying in their story, to keep with the theme that you brought in from the beginning today of how we make predictive assumptions, predictive stories about each other. We're going to stay in the story when we feel scared. Bottom line. So everything I do, from bringing green tea and cups from home to a mediation in a professional setting, to bringing flowers, to bringing chocolate, to bringing cookies, to some amount of lightness, is all intentional on my part to try to help people get more into a calmer zone to have a more comfortable conversation.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
so you actually do that? You bring in like flowers and cookies and
Mhm,
things like that.
mhm. Yes, sometimes
Okay.
I've brought tablecloths. It's just little things
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
workplaces.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. So that's just to kind of resituate us. We had that first pillar, we're in the middle pillar. We've got the opening, and then the second part around clarifying what the topic is super important. And nonviolent communication talks about this particular thing I'm about to talk about. Jervis Bush in his book Clear Leadership. I mean, I can go on. It's a fundamental basic. Krishnamurti spoke about it. It's separating out our evaluative language. I go like this because I have a worksheet for every single one of these steps. In this worksheet, there's 2 columns. So you have a column for evaluative language and you have a column for descriptive language, objective language. And the more we can speak in objective language, the more we can be heard. Whereas if I say, well, what do you want to talk about? I want to talk about how unprofessional you are. Well, that I'm going like this because it's an evaluative statement. And as soon as you're saying something to me about my worth as a human being, then I'm going to shut down. So it's also a very important step. And I mean, we're going to misstep, so things will happen, but um, that is a key skill to be able to disarm the rhetoric, and the rhetoric is everywhere.
This is fascinating,
Oh,
and
good.
I think the audience is going to find this fascinating. Like, I had no idea that communication involved all of these steps, or good communication involved all of these steps.
Oh, good. It makes me happy to hear. The coaching profession means so much to me. It was part of the reason I was so excited to be here with you. And I feel like there's a lot we could be learning as coaches about conflict, and it directly relates to neuroscience. So you've got that second step, this complexity of that, but it's also very clear. And then the third step, most people overstep or they jump over, and we call it developing understanding. It's essentially getting curious about, so you've set some things around feeling safer, so you can open up to the curiosity about, well, what has been going on for you? What was the impact? Because impact is hidden unless expressed. And that's Wallen's interpersonal gap. That's a communication theory, that intention is hidden unless expressed. So clients, as they're opening, express their intention, and impact is hidden unless expressed. So this step is really about being able to express the impact on a deeper level, on a needs level.
So it prevents really the other party from going into their predictive mode, right? And
Yes.
predicting something different
Yes.
than what is actually said.
Yes. Yeah, in transformative mediation, they had this task that they would give their clients. And the task was look for new information. And so I picked that up. A lot of it's been intuitive, right? Because I've been doing it for so long. When I heard that 2 decades ago, I thought, oh, that's a great idea. So I would tell my clients in preparation and then also in the mediation room, remember, you're looking for new information. So I've seen this happen where there's a light bulb moment. And often I will stop the parties and go, what happened there? It seemed like you heard something new. Ding, 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 ding. I've been asking them to look for that.
Yeah.
And then they go, and they express it. And the other person, you can see their shoulders going down and relaxing. Oh, yeah, you finally heard. Like, I haven't heard that one yet. So that's around developing understanding. And it's listening for the deeper needs. That's the part I really want to emphasize because I teach an interest-based model, and interests fundamentally are our deeper motivations for why we do what we do. So this part of the conversation, which we often overstep, will go, "Hey, get in my office. I need to talk to you right now." Or, "Hey, you did this horrible thing. How could you have done that? Do something else." We jump to solutions. And in this model, solutions is the last of those 4 steps. Open with intentionality, be clear and objective about how you're describing what you want to talk about, and then speak about needs. And then when you've got mutual understanding, can you come with a new solution? And if you've got the bandwidth, I'll tell you a little story from a book, Getting to Yes.
Oh, I would love that.
Okay, it'll illustrate what I'm trying to describe with words. So the story's from the book Getting to Yes, which was written in the 80s. And the story is essentially 2 people are fighting over an orange. And one option for how to deal with that is one person gets, power over, like, I'm going to keep the orange. And that's certainly something that we see a lot of, especially in political arenas. We see power over kind of moves, or bosses to employees, or parents to children for that matter. Power over, I'm going to take it. Another way is compromise. Well, let's just win a little and lose a little, get a knife and cut it in half. And that's where the conversation, if there is a conversation, stays. Whereas interest-based is you get curious, and I'm pointing down this mountain. We go into the iceberg, further down. Why did you want that, without asking why? Because why can feel accusatory, but the curiosity piece, what is it about that orange you wanted? So then all of a sudden, there's a big reveal. And the big reveal is, oh, I wanted the orange because I wanted to make my grandmother a cake with the rind. And then the other person, well, I'm really thirsty and I want to make homemade juice. So all of a sudden, they've entered new territory with new information, just to bring us right back to this very same thing. You need safety. You need a certain way to be able to have the conversation that you don't keep triggering the shutdown. And then that capacity to be creative and understand each other opens up a whole world, and they come to a new solution. And that is the definition of collaboration. That is the true definition of win-win. You need a certain pathway into the conversation, though. And I'll finish off just with the last step, which is outside of the 4. That's the conversation. And that is my prayer and my wish for every conversation, on a personal level, on a professional level, on a societal level, and a political level. It works on every single level. And I know that with 100% faith, because I've also had a podcast and I've interviewed people who have worked at the highest levels, and they've told me it works on every level. So the last step is a growth mindset or a learner mindset. Evaluate it. Learn from what you've been doing. Get feedback. So that's it. That's the 8-step model.
Well, as I said before, I never knew that there were so many steps to having a great conversation. And I imagine you could use that for any type of conversation.
You got it.
Probably not all the steps, but some of those steps. So how do you get them to listen more carefully to what people are saying?
Some of it is in the preparation, and it's in every single one of those steps. They're all intentionally designed to help them listen to each other more.
Well, one of the steps that you mentioned was that look for new information,
Yes.
right? And that would keep them laser focused on
Yes.
listening for new information.
Yeah. Thank you for pulling that out. It's definitely a powerful one.
Yeah. And the other one is about that struck me was managing their emotions. If people get into a negative emotion, if they're triggered, then they just can't have the conversation. They're going to hear what they expect to hear from the other
Yeah.
person, which will derail the conversation.
I want to speak about that for a minute. And I'm so glad that you've picked out that one as well, because I'm noticing societal wide, where we have different information being fed because of algorithms, different information being fed to people of different political persuasions, as well as camps in a workplace. I mean, it works the same on every level. What's happening and what I can see happening is that people don't want to speak with each other. And think about it yourself if you're mad about something or with somebody. You don't want to speak with them for a little while, right? You're recalibrating yourself. But if you have information around you that keeps reinforcing your own perspective, I'm going like this because I see a tornado of information reinforcing each party's perspective, politically and societally. And I'm concerned about that because of what we're talking about here today.
Well, it's confirmation bias.
Yes.
And it's very real. People look for information that confirms what they already believe. And so it pushes people further apart.
Yes. And I guess I'm hoping and wanting to have a pathway for us as coaches, as conflict resolvers, to be able to contribute to help people be able to speak with each other more. Because if we don't have that sense of safety, which we don't right now, we're just continuing to live in that confirmation bias.
And then we continue to hear what we expect to hear.
Exactly.
From people rather than listening to what they are actually saying.
Yes, exactly. So it's a very important time in the world right now for connecting with our best selves and breaking through some of those biases that we spoke about today. From my perspective, I'm biased. I think there's nothing more important than this topic. How do we deal with difficult conversations? How do we deal with conflict? Because if we can't come to mutual understanding, whether it's an orange or it's a political issue, then we can't move forward. And we have a lot of problems we need to deal with in this world.
Absolutely. So are people aware that we hear what we expect to hear and that we're filling in the blanks?
No, I don't think so. No.
Do you tell them explicitly that that's what the brain does?
No. I refer to some things like negativity bias, and there's the ladder of inference. Do you know Chris Argy's? And
I'm somewhat familiar with it.
Yeah, so I might speak about the ladder of inference and Johari window. So I might do that.
Yeah. So you emphasize clarity and compassion in conflict. And so what role does deep listening play in that? And why is it so hard for many of us to actually listen?
Well, I think we've touched on some of it in this conversation, certainly in terms of safety. One of the things that's come up, though, hearing your question around clarity and compassion, I think about the importance of holding both. And we can have different ways of understanding both of those words, clarity and compassion. I think for me, clarity has to do with decision making. It has to do with power. And it can also have to do with our orientation politically. So people who tend to be more right-leaning tend to be very clear, or certainly they value clarity, they value assertiveness, they value just getting the job done, efficiency.
Yeah.
There's a couple of conflict personality inventories that map that quality. You can call it clarity, you can call it power, on the top part of a graph. And it's an L-shaped graph. So Thomas Kilmann inventory is one, Craybill is another. So there's a couple of very common ones. They've got power at the top, clarity. And then on the bottom horizontal axis, you've got compassion. And that could also be understood as love. It could be understood as community. Now, I think you might also start to see people who are maybe not even just on the left, but might have more communitarian values would orient here. And so there's a lot of ways of being able to understand that clarity, power, and compassion, love, power and love are both equally important when it comes to helping people move through conflict. And the way the 5 conflict styles work, some people lean more towards power or clarity or assertiveness. Some people lean, and it's not really assertiveness. Assertiveness is a combination of power and love, but it's that capacity to assert your own goals, your own needs. And this other one, to be able to care for the other. So it's known as accommodating style and directing style or competing style. And then down at the bottom, you've got avoiding style. And then the middle part, we have a little bit of time, we've got a little bit of care or whatever. And the top style, the one we spoke about the orange, is when you're using clarity, you're using a goal orientation not just for yourself, though. You're also using it for the other. And this is where power and love come together. And there's a great quote by Martin Luther King Jr., which I never get straight. So I'm going to paraphrase it. It's something like, power without love is abuse, but love without power is anemic. And then he goes on to speak about power needs to be used in the service of love. And this is a whole philosophy, a whole orientation to how we can see assertiveness or clarity and compassion. And that's why those words are important to me.
Oh, I love that. I hadn't heard those before. I love that.
I'm glad.
So when coaches and leaders who struggle to stay grounded when conversations heat up, what's one brain-based practice they can use to stay present instead of reactive?
Okay, so my answer is going to be a little complex, maybe. I think it depends what brain state you're in. So some of the research I understand from emotional brain training, because I'm a member of emotional brain training, a simplification is that there are 5 brain states. And if you're in brain state 1, you're great. You're connected. You're in a green zone, if you want to use the children reference to a calm state. You're in flow. All is well. In that brain state, you're not going to need any tips on how to stay calm or how to stay cool. The second brain state, you're probably not going to need it either. So the second brain state is where you're okay. You're not on top of the world, but you're fine. Still don't really need anything. Might want to have your green tea or your coffee or whatever with you, but don't need a lot. Now we're moving into brain states 3, 4, and 5. When you're in brain state 3, you're edgy, you're irritated. You're not out of control by any means, but you're edgy and irritated. In that brain state, the common tips come to mind there. So feel your feet on the ground, take a deep breath, bite your tongue, bring in a little talisman and hold that. There's an umpteen amount of ways that you can soothe yourself, especially if you've thought it through, which, I have an allowance for in the process that I've created. Think about how you're going to deal with those moments. You can have visualized something before you came in the room. There's a lot of different things we can do. Once you start slipping into brain state 4 and 5, there's not a lot you can do. In brain state 4, you've got an amygdala hijack potentially going on. You're starting to get into behaviors that you might have exhibited when you were 5 or 6 years old. And that isn't to denigrate our emotional responses. It's that we're often brought to those original memories in that emotional expression without even realizing. It's all very subconscious. So in that brain state, and as you slip into brain state 5, which is full-blown panic, screaming or crying or whatever, like there's a state before complete loss of control. At that point, the best you can do is probably take a break. If you've got the frame of mind to take a break, 5 minutes, and not to run away and say, I'm never speaking with you again. It has to be responsible. So let's take a 5-minute break, a 20-minute break. Let's come back tomorrow, like within 24 hours might be reasonable, but not indefinite, because that's abandonment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it depends on what brain state. I was coaching in an anger management course once, and I ran into this person who I was coaching who seemed to be unfazed by anything anybody would be throwing at him, because we do a lot of simulations in the learning experiences. And so I was curious. Like, how is it that people can swear at you, or like whatever people were throwing at him? He was just like, okay, I can do this. So I found out he worked in a transportation industry where the people would be very upset if they couldn't catch their train, plane, whatever it was that he was working in. He was the last stop. So he would only get the enraged parties. And he said for the first couple of years of his job, it was so not only disheartening, he was getting sick because he didn't know how to deal with that level of rage and anger coming at him at least once a day. So he hired a coach. Great story for our profession. He hired this person for 6 months. And he said in the first couple of months, all he could do in the work that he was being coached to do was up his self-awareness about what his body did when he was getting into the, I'll call it brain state 4 and 5. That's all he could manage. Oh, I noticed that my body flushed. I noticed my face get red. I noticed my jaw get tightened. But that's only one part of the formula. To actually notice your awareness and what's happening with your body when you're that upset. The second part is he rewired. So he chose a phrase that went with his body. His body would heat up, so he chose the phrase cool down. And then for the next couple of months in his contract with his coach, the person would help him and remind him, go practice that now when the person comes at you. So eventually it got encoded in the long-term memory in his basal ganglia, where it came up automatically that he was able to just cool down. And that story stayed with me because I think it's a great example of that we need to do the work to be able to recode ourselves, to be able to deal with things when they're that stressful for any of us.
Yeah, and our bodily reactions come first. They come before we're even aware of what they are. And so it is important to become aware of them because our bodily reactions come up and then immediately, it's sent to the brain and our brain interprets it. And it's going to interpret it like it's always interpreted it from the past.
Exactly.
So finally, before we finish up today, if you could give one message to every coach about how to approach communication and conflict differently, what would it be?
I think if I could give one message to coaches, it would be to work on for me to work on my own connection to myself, because conversations that are conflicting will activate us because of the way the emotional brain works. It's a porous mechanism. So the more I can modulate and self-regulate my own physiology, I can act as a triage to my clients so that they can access their better selves in our conversations and their better thinking selves so that they can create a better future.
That's a great point, Julia. Thank you. And that goes back also to emotional contagion, right, which is a coach's secret weapon. If you can manage your own emotions, then you can help your clients manage theirs. So what's the best way for listeners to learn more about you and your work?
They can find me a couple of ways. I've got a personal website, juliamenard.com, and then there's the On Conflict Leadership Institute, and all you need to put in is onconflict.com. And I do have 2 seasons worth of podcasts where I've interviewed conflict luminaries, so that might be of interest to some people. It's at onconflictpodcast.com.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I truly appreciate your time on the show today, Julia.
Thank you, Irena. I'm so happy about the work that you're doing. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. As my conversation with Julia emphasized, our brains are wired to make meaning, constantly predicting and filling in the gaps. We see and hear not just with our eyes and ears, but through the lens of our past experiences, beliefs, and expectations. But that doesn't mean we're stuck. The more aware we become of these filters, the more space we create to truly listen, to slow down, get curious, and check whether what we think we heard is actually what was said. Great communication isn't about getting it perfect. It's about staying present, asking better questions, and being open to the possibility that there's more to the story than our brain's first impression. And that's a skill we can all build, one conscious conversation at a time.